Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. Good morning to members, officers and the public attending this full meeting of the Environment and Economic Scrutiny Committee, all watching live through the County Council's website. My name is Councillor Ray Wootton. I'm the Chairman of this committee. Councillor Martin Greggs, Vice Chairman of the committee, is also in attendance and also welcome on behalf of our officers. In terms of housekeeping, in the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the council chamber through the rear door, walking through the reception to the front car park. Can I remind everyone to ensure that their mobiles are set to silent, laptops and iPads are also there. We will now move to formal agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence, replacements councillors. Kira.
We have apologies from Councillor Higgs and we have substitutions. Councillor Mrs Overton sitting for Councillor Baxter and Councillor Hall sitting for Councillor Carrington. Thank you.
Welcome, Councillor Hall. Thank you for coming, and welcome to Councillor Marion Overton. Item 2, the agenda, declarations of members' interests. Do members wish to declare any interests? No, good. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting of the Environment and Economic Scrutiny Committee held on the 22nd of February. I'm going to go through them page by page just for accuracy only. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and the last page, page 10. Do I propose that they are a true record of the meeting held on the 22nd of February, proposed by Councillor Fleetwood? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Greggs, Vice Chairman. We'll now go to the vote. So we're voting whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour? Thank you. Abstentions? Thank you. And against? Those minutes are recorded as a true record on the 22nd of February. Item 4, announcements by myself, the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. We have a lighter than usual agenda today with 2 pre-decision scrutiny items to be taken. I'd like to encourage you to keep your questions and contributions succinct. We now move to the Executive Councillor announcements. Do we have any Executive Councillor announcements? Councillor Davey?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm pleased to join you this morning from the ever sunny Lincolnshire coast. I'd first like to just say, I mean, there is now a backdrop of very difficult global news that I'm sure members are aware of. Last week, Deutsche Bank were the first to forecast a recession next year. So I think we are living in challenging times in terms of the global outlook and obviously the national outlook. But I would like to share with you this morning some very positive news since we last met, as our team has had a very busy few weeks. Firstly, I was delighted to lead the delegation to MIPIM 2022. The Council's focus was on highlighting Greater Lincolnshire's UK food value growth ambitions and promoting the South Lincolnshire Food Enterprise Zone. There were also positive conversations about food sector growth, commercial and residential investment, city and town opportunities, alternative utility providers and hotel investment. The Council's representatives were joined by 17 Team Lincolnshire ambassadors. And we have a great story to tell about what is going on in Lincolnshire. The South Lincolnshire Food Enterprise Zone near Holbeach continues to progress apace, and the Council's new 3-storey hub building remains in budget and on programme for completion and handover in July. Interest in the long leasehold service plots on phase 1 continues to be strong, and there is already strong interest in phase 2 from both potential investors and occupiers. A number of those meetings I took part in personally in Cannes. In November, the Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership launched the UK Food Valley Initiative to support growth and encourage inward investment to the area and ensure that existing food sector companies and new investors are fully supported. The South Lincolnshire Fairs was heavily promoted as being central to this. I'll also say there is strong activity on the coast too. the Skegness Countryside Business Park extension will shortly see construction start on the first plots to be sold, which will provide a number of small commercial units for local small businesses. Yesterday, I was delighted to have the official launch of the new Boatshed Beach Cafe in Huttoft. Yesterday's event was wonderful, and I was delighted to see many people have already discovered the coastal offer, with many families enjoying their Easter break. The Boatshed Cafe will help to raise the quality and seasonal extension of our tourism offer, one of our key missions for our very valuable visitor economy. I'm also pleased to update you on the very first Lincolnshire Visit Lincolnshire Tourism Conference since COVID, which was held on March 22nd at the Lincolnshire Showground. There was an excellent turnout of around 170 visitor economy businesses. We launched the Green Tourism Toolkit, and it was positively received by the businesses and the speakers who were there. Green pilot workshops will follow between May and December of this year. And of course, I'd always like to leave you with a couple of things to look forward to and events for you to share more widely with businesses in your area. The Council is hosting a free workshop on becoming a council supplier on the 27th of April. Team Lincolnshire ambassadors and council procurement experts will be talking about the public sector contract regulations, where to find new procurement pipelines, and how to identify supply chain opportunities. Please do promote this event to any local businesses in your area who may be considering becoming suppliers, because it will be very beneficial to them. I'll make sure officers circulate details of these events to you. I know that decarbonisation and the green industrial revolution are topics that you frequently discuss in this committee. I therefore recommend the Team Lincolnshire webinar to you on industrial decarbonisation and the route to net zero on the 28th of April. You have a major item on your agenda this morning for the environment part of my portfolio, so I will not touch on that and leave you to your deliberations. But there is a lot of really good positive work taking place in the environment sector, and I'm looking forward to making sure that we as a county council play our full part in delivering better, higher quality protection for businesses and residents in terms of flood alleviation schemes in the future. So I'll leave you there, Chairman, and happily pick up any questions on any subject members wish to raise.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Davey. Are there any questions from members? No, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Dyer, do you wish to make any announcements? No. We'll now move on to the senior officers. I know Vanessa Strange, you're listening in. Are you well this morning?
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you. No announcements from me, but thank you very much.
Any other officers wish to make any announcements? No. We'll move on then to the substantive item, Flood and Coastal Resilience Project, the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project submission of an outline business case. I can't think of anything worse than a property or location being flooded by groundwater. And so therefore look forward to Matthew's presentation. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Yes, so if I may, I'll take this report as read. It is a pre-key decision item. It's around the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project, which is a result of a partner and stakeholder submission into DEFRA to successfully achieve £7.5 million for Greater Lincolnshire. So this is ourselves, Lincolnshire County Council, working with North and North East Lincolnshire and a whole range of partners and stakeholders such as the Environment Agency, water companies, as well as district authorities and others, to really look at the issues surrounding groundwater, to better understand groundwater issues across Greater Lincolnshire, but to also look at where opportunities also might occur around better understanding groundwater. I think it's fair to say that groundwater is perhaps the least understood of the flood risk that we face in the county. So this funding is absolutely invaluable for us to get a better understanding of that and see what that might mean moving forwards across the Greater Lincolnshire area. As part of the process that we are in with DEFRA, we have to submit an outline business case to secure the funding that has been made available, and the deadline for that outline business case is the end of April. So the reason for bringing this report to committee today is to seek any views from committee in advance of the key decision from the Executive Council being made for us to submit the outline business case on behalf of Lincolnshire County Council and the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project. The reason being that Lincolnshire County Council, in its role as lead local flood authority, will be administering these funds and be project lead, although this is a true partnership response. I'll leave it there if I may. I'll keep it brief, but more than happy to take any questions.
Before I open up to members of the committee, the actions on this report is the committee is invited to consider and comment on the details contained in the report, and 1, determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Council and agree an additional comment to be passed to the Executive Councillors. So my first question is from Councillor Ian Fleetwood.
Well, it's not so much a question. It's first of all, you've no doubt got me down as a declaration. I'm a member of Witham Third Internal Drainage Board, who are mentioned within the report. So I'll just, you've got that somewhere, I'm sure. But just picking up on the report as a whole, I think the committee are fairly familiar with the fact that I do a little bit with the Environment Agency and various flood issues in different locations. And I have gone through this report with a pretty fine tooth comb. And I'd like to put it on record that I regard this report as being exceedingly well written. And I'm not going to, I can't fault it in any location. It seems like a great way forwards, and congratulations to the author for writing the report. I'm quite happy to move it as it stands. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. Any further questions? Councillor Overton.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'm subbing today, so I'm probably not as well versed, but can I just out of interest, and I recognise this is a partnership approach, so it is for the whole of Greater Lincolnshire, but looking at the map on, I think it was page 35, I think this is, am I right, this is where the projects are going to be, effectively where the money is going to be spent. And I'm wondering if this is going to tackle many of the things like our small villages. I've got 3 in my area that suffer significant flooding, and they've had some research and a little bit of work done, but it's not enough. The council's done what they can, but really you need a bigger budget to do the job properly. And I just wonder if this will resolve any of that kind of problem, or is it really just looking at the big projects that you're concentrating on? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Matthew.
Yes, thank you for that. At the moment, this isn't really project-based to tackle specific issues in the county. This is very much about learning and understanding the effects of groundwater and what that might mean, so that we can then use that knowledge and learning in the future to tackle some of these issues that we face in the county. So ultimately, this will involve rolling out of, hopefully, work on the ground to mitigate issues where we have groundwater and people have suffered that. What we've identified in the first instance are 3 sites, as you point out, which is the village of Scotwick on the Limestone Becks in Lincolnshire, Grimsby in North East Lincolnshire, and Barton and Barrow in North Lincolnshire. So that's across the 3 authority areas. Excuse me. And those are areas where we know we have known groundwater issues and where there have been problems before. So they have been picked as 3 pilot sites to really work it hard to try and understand what the effects of groundwater are, how groundwater reacts and what that might mean, so that we can look at community engagement, so there's warning and informing, and communities can be better prepared as to what the effects of groundwater might be, but equally where there might be opportunities to harness that groundwater for whether it be environmental benefits or increased water capacity. So this funding will really allow us to push the boundaries and explore in the greatest, greater than we've ever been able to before, what groundwater might mean for us in the county, both understanding its effects and the opportunities. So then part of that project will be to take that learning and see how that can be embedded in our day-to-day activities, so rolling that out more widely across Greater Lincolnshire to look at where we do have groundwater issues in the county. So very much a learning process as we go forward through this.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. And I appreciate that you don't want to waste money and you have the intelligence, if you like, to make sure they go in the right places. And we have had that company, Intelligent Drainage, I think they call, something like that. They have been out and spent a great deal of money doing really detailed work in some of our villages, but the money's been spent on the research and the work's not done. So we're still suffering the flooding issues. So I mean, I appreciate and understand, I'm not against what you're doing. I just would really like to see more of the money spent in actually fixing the problems that we can see already without, as a priority. But thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I have Councillor Carrington, who's requested to speak. He is a member of the committee, but he is off sick at the moment, so I'm going to allow him to speak. Councillor Carrington.
Thank you, Chairman. That's very kind of you. I'm isolating as a precaution at the moment due to having been exposed to somebody with COVID, but I didn't want to risk giving it to any colleagues. But I am grateful for the opportunity to have a word on this, because I do think it's extremely important, and I would certainly have been seconding Councillor Fleetwood had I been present in the chamber. I think when we talk about flooding, the automatic assumption is to think of the two big types. We all remember the dreadful warning from history that is 1953 and the potential for coastal inundation. And we all know the risks of dikes and other defences of our watercourses failing, as we saw most horrifically in Wainfleet, but there have been plenty of other examples in recent years. The issue of groundwater flooding is far, far less known, but it is absolutely terrible for its sufferers. It is, as we've heard from Matthew Harrison, whose report I think absolutely has to be commended, a very, very complex and very difficult issue. Effectively, in many places, the water table can rise above ground level, and the effects of that are absolutely disastrous. If you're lucky, you may find that there is an ingress of clean water into your house. If you're lucky, it will still do terrible damage that takes a long time to resolve. If you're less lucky, because the hydraulic pressure is a very major force, it will infiltrate the foul water drains. They will then overflow into your garden, into your property, or actually into your house. And in one of the villages in my county division and my district ward, Hayington, we've had all of those circumstances. And the hydrology behind it is immensely complex. In the example of Hayington, which is part of a similar geology and hydrology to Scopwick, which Matthew mentioned there, somebody's actually done PhD studies to illustrate the linkage with the water table in the Trent Valley. These are very complex issues, and I'm absolutely delighted that we have a project which will first seek to understand them, because there's no point trying to do solutions unless we really understand the problem. So first try and understand what that problem is, and then work on mitigations. And I'm very much, we've already had discussions about Hayington with officers. We'll be reviewing the results of Scopwick in the course of the coming months. As they come out, we'll see what applications we can make in Hayington, and I'm sure in plenty of other places across the district. Water, as the Flood and Water Management Committee, our excellent colleagues, have often said, is a resource to be managed, not just a problem. It is a resource, and this project looks at it as a resource. But finding a mitigation, finding understanding for this problem is immensely important. So I would strongly commend it to colleagues today, and I do wish I was there to vote for it. Thank you very much for hearing me speak, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carrington. Good to see you soon. Unfortunately, because you're coming via Zoom, you're not allowed to vote. So, but look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Councillor Dar.
Chairman, just very, very quickly, I just want to echo the words of Councillor Fleetwood and Carrington and pass on both Councillor Davies and my my own thanks to you, Matt, and your team for pulling this piece of work together under a very, very tight timescale and being new in post as well. So it was mentioned in one of our briefings last week that it's a fantastic start for you in your role as flood and water manager. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Matthew, I've looked at your report and you mentioned about 25 local areas. Could you give us a rough idea where they are?
Those 25 local areas are the other projects that have been successful to bid into the DEFRA funding, so they're spread across England. There are 2 other projects that are actually particularly focusing on groundwater. The Grace project, as it's called, which is located in Buckinghamshire, and one in the northeast around Durham. So we have made contact with the project leads in those areas, and there will be some information sharing and learning taken between those projects. The other projects are looking at different a range of different sort of flooding issues and water resource issues. So some of it's coastal, for example, in the northwest. One of those is a coastal dune project. So they're very, very wide ranging. But there's 3 projects out of the 25 which are particularly focusing on groundwater. Ourselves, Buckinghamshire, and in the northeast. So we will be sharing learning across those projects. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
And I can echo Councillor Dyer. I wrote down here, you know, congratulations to you on your report. It took me some time, considerable time to read it, but it's well worth reading it. Are there any further questions from members? Councillor Griggs.
It's not a question. I just want to echo the sentiments of previous colleagues who've spoken. I'm not an expert in flooding. I know very little about it, but I found the report really easy to read and really comprehensive. So I was quite pleased that I didn't have any questions following on from that. That usually says that you've explained things quite well. So in that vein, I'd like to second the report as is.
Thank you very much, Councillor Griggs. Any further questions from members? Right. The proposal is that I move that the committee, Councillor Fleetwood will move that the committee endorses the report and supports the recommendations as these are set out on page 13 of the report, and ask that your comments from today's discussions are passed on to the Executive Council for Economic Development, Environment and Planning as recorded. It's been proposed by Councillor Fleetwood, been seconded by Councillor Griggs. I'm now going to go to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you very much, Matthew. We now move on to the second item, the Lincolnshire Minerals Waste and Local Plan, issues and options for updating the plan. Adrian, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Well, this item actually relates to a report for the Executive, which is seeking the Executive's approval to really commence the process of updating the local plan by going out to consultation with the very early stage documents, including the issues and options document. Yes, please. The actual updating of the plan is quite a long and complex process. So I wanted to start off by just going through a little bit of background about the Minerals and Waste Local Plan. At the moment, we do have an existing Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan, and basically it was prepared in 2 parts. So sorry, if you could move on to the next slide, please. It was prepared in 2 parts. The first part is a core strategy and development management policies, and that was adopted in 2016, and that basically sets out the key principles to guide the future winning and working of minerals in the form of waste management in the county up to the year 2031. The development management policies of that document really deal with how we deal with environmental and amenity impacts from those developments. The second part of the document, the site locations document, followed in 2017, and that includes specific proposals and policies for the provision of land and minerals for waste development. If we could move to the next slide, please. Just to put this in context and the importance is the Minerals and Waste Local Plan actually forms part of the statutory development plan for the county. So it sits together with the district council local plans and neighbourhood plans. And the reason it's important that all applications for minerals and waste must be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Well, the reason that it's important for the County Council is the Mineral and Waste Planning Authority for the county, so we're responsible for the preparation not only of the plan but for the determination of minerals and waste planning applications. And generally speaking, because all the minerals and waste policies are actually contained in the Minerals and Waste Local Plan, in effect those applications need to be determined in accordance with the adopted Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan. Because of its importance, we do need to monitor the plan every year. So we basically look at the performance of the policy. So we sort of assess whether applications are actually being determined in full accordance with the plan. And the results of that are issued every year in an authority monitoring report. Next slide, please. If the monitoring reports indicate that there's a particular problem with the plan, then that's an indication that we may need to update the plan or to initiate a review of the plan. Whether or not the monitoring reports indicate any particular problems, we must review the plan at least every 5 years. And that 5 years came to an end last year, so the plan was was reviewed at the end of 2020 and into 2021. And the results of that review were actually considered by the Scrutiny Committee on the 12th of January. Basically, the review found that 11 policies were not fully effective, which generally means that applications that were being approved or refused weren't necessarily fully in accordance with the policies. So that indicates that they perhaps needed to be updated. That review paper went before the full County Council on the 19th of February, and the County Council gave approval for the updating of the Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan in full in accordance with a new Minerals and Waste Development Scheme. And basically that Minerals and Waste Development Scheme is a programme of works for updating the plan. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, there's quite a few stages involved with updating a Minerals and Waste Local Plan. We're at the very first stage, where we're seeking approval from the executive to go out to consultation on an issues and options document, including a call for sites exercise. So this is a very high-level document at the formative stage of plan making. So all being well, if the approval of the executive, that will go out to consultation in spring of this year. Following that process and the results of the consultation exercise, we will then prepare a draft plan, the first draft plan, which will look at the preferred approach for the new Minerals and Waste Local Plan. So it's a more detailed plan, and that will go out to consultation subject to approval in spring of next year. Once we've got the results of that consultation in, we can then fine-tune the document, and then we move on to the third stage, which is producing the publication draft, which is basically the final draft, which the County Council is basically satisfied that document is suitable for adoption. Once we get to that stage, we still have to go out to another period of consultation. But if we want to submit it for examination, we can't make any further changes to the document. What would happen is we would submit the document to the Secretary of State, together with all the responses we've received through the consultation exercise. Then if there aren't any needs for changes, then they're discussed during the examination process, and subject to any modifications put forward by the inspector at that stage, the County Council can then, well, subject to the approval of the inspector, we can then go on to adopt the plan, subject to any modifications recommended by the inspector. So with the current timetable, we expect adoption to be around winter 2024, 2025, so it's some time off. Next slide, please. So going into a bit more detail about the first stage of the plan, which is the issues and options. This document, which is attached to as Appendix A to the executive report, as I've already said, is very much the formative stage of plan making. It basically identifies the key issues or topics which need consideration when we're updating the plan. And it largely follows on from the sort of the issues that have been considered in the Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan Review. It also proposes options for improving the plan, and then invite stakeholders to comment on the issues and options and put forward either alternative options or to identify any other issues which we haven't identified. I should say that document also includes a series of questions throughout to help prompt appropriate responses. Next slide, please. One of the consequences of making the decision to update the plan is that the plan period will need to change, and that's because under government policy, a plan must run from 15 years, at least 15 years from the date of adoption. Well, our current plan only goes up to 2031, so we're proposing to roll the new Minerals and Waste Local Plan forward to cover the period to the end of 2040. Now, that in itself gives rise to additional issues as well, because the Minerals and Local Plan needs to actually make provision for an adequate supply of minerals and waste management facilities. So the existing plan only does that up to 2031. So we need to make more provision to cover the period up to 2040. And to do that, we need a decent evidence base to justify the approach we're taking. Next slide, please. Now, I've talked about the need to make additional provision for minerals. Generally speaking, for minerals, we do that by criteria-based policies. But we can't quite take that approach for aggregate minerals. When I say aggregate minerals, I'm talking about granular material used in the construction industry. So it basically includes sand and gravel and crushed rock, which in Lincolnshire is basically crushed limestone. And we actually have to basically set out how we need to look ahead, work out how much provision we need to make during the plan period up to 2040, and then set out how we're going to make that level of provision so that we can ensure a steady and adequate supply. We're quite fortunate with aggregates because each year we actually do a survey of the minerals industry to work out sales throughout the county, and that information feeds into what's known as a local aggregate assessment. And one of the things that the local aggregate assessment does is it sets a provision rate for how much sand and gravel and how much crushed rock we are using annually. Under government guidance, the starting point in terms of setting provision rate is to base it on the previous 10 years' sales, but that can be adjusted due to for local circumstances. For sand and gravel, we've actually found that the 10-year average works well. The last plan was based on the 10-year average, and sales have actually been remarkably consistent with that average. So we are proposing to take the same approach on this plan. For limestone, it's a bit more complicated. We've seen a lot more growth in limestone sales in recent years, so we have adjusted the figure to be based on the last 3 years' average. The rise in limestone sales is actually good news because limestone has limitations as an aggregate. It doesn't meet, it's not as high spec as, say, the carboniferous limestones of Derbyshire or the granites of Leicestershire. But however, where it can be used in projects, it should be used because you would never put an over-specified material into a project for which you don't need it because it adds to the costs. Financially and environmentally, because it involves transporting material much longer distances. So we intend to try and make provision for the limestone because it is a local benefit. Basically, if you take the provision rates, annual provision rates set for sand and gravel and for crushed rock, and then multiply them by the period of the new plan, that will give us how much sand and gravel and crushed rock we will need during the plan period. But we can subtract from that figure reserves that already have planning permission. And if we do that, it actually gives us a shortfall in sand and gravel of 22.9 million tonnes during the plan period. And for limestone or crushed rock, it's 3.84 million tonnes. So at the moment in our Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan, we do have quite a few sites allocated already for sand and gravel extraction. Some of those sites have already come forward and been granted planning permission, but some others are still awaiting applications. So the approach we're proposing to take is that we will carry those sites forward wherever possible. So we can then subtract that figure from the sand and gravel shortfall. I should say that's where appropriate, because obviously we will need to check with the industry. It may be that some companies aren't interested in continuing to promote certain sites. So that will be something we will need to check. In terms of the remaining shortfall, when we've taken all that into account, we're proposing that that would be met by allocating new additional sites in the plan. So if we could move to the next slide, please. To help facilitate that, we are proposing to undertake a call for sites exercise that would be done in conjunction with the consultation with the issues and options. So this will invite interested parties, mainly landowners and mineral operators, to nominate sites for the future winning and working of aggregate minerals. The nominated sites that are put forward will then be assessed in accordance with the proposed site selection methodology, which is attached as Appendix B to the executive report. And that document will also be subject to consultation alongside the issues and options. So if necessary, it can be fine-tuned. Next slide, please. We also need to consider extra waste management provision. This is a much more complicated subject than aggregate provision. So we did commission what's known as a new waste needs assessment last year, which were prepared by specialist consultants. And basically, the waste needs assessment consists of forecasting future waste arisings, and we went a little bit beyond the plan period. It goes up to 2045 for different waste streams. So those waste streams are, for example, local authority collected waste, commercial industrial waste, construction, demolition and extraction waste, hazardous waste, etc. So once we've worked out the consultants had worked out the forecast future waste arisings up to 2045, they went on to assess the existing waste management capacity in the county, and that's both built capacity, so it would include, for example, the energy from waste plant, but it also includes things like landfill as well, so the remaining void capacities, and it then looks at whether there's any surpluses or any gaps in capacity at key dates up to 2045. And the good news is that there were no capacity gaps identified up to 2045. So basically, on the face of it, that would indicate that the County Council will remain self-sufficient, net self-sufficient in terms of managing waste for the new plan period. Now, when I say net self-sufficient, what I mean by that is that most waste operations are commercial operations, and so, most waste producers are as well. So if, for example, you have a waste producer that's close to the county boundary, they may well choose to send their waste to a site in Nottinghamshire or Leicestershire or wherever. But vice versa, operators in Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire occasionally will send waste into Lincolnshire. So we actually plan for a net self-sufficiency. So we've got sufficient waste management facilities to manage the overall net amount of waste. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So the reality is, although we are net self-sufficient, applications will inevitably come forward during the period of the plan, and there are a number of reasons for this. These are probably just some of them outlined on this slide, but for a start, there will inevitably be some sites that will close during the plan period, which will give rise to a need to open up new sites. We also expect the emergence of new technologies to emerge during the plan period, and this ties in with what's known as the waste hierarchy. And there's in the reports on page 113, there's a triangle showing what the waste hierarchy is, and this is basically government policy that we should really aim to. The ideal is to reduce waste in the first place, and if we can't reduce waste, we should aim to reuse products. If we can't reuse or recycle products, then we should aim to recover something from those products. And the energy from waste plant is an example of that, where we recover waste. And if we can't recover, then as a last resort, we dispose of waste, which is basically, well, primarily landfill. So basically, in order to facilitate the waste hierarchy, there will be occasions during the plan period when we'll be expected to consider new proposals for facilities which will help to move waste up that hierarchy. The third point on there, which I've already touched on, is changes in cross-boundary movement. So it could be that facilities in other counties may close, so other waste may come in. And I've put in brackets there, duty to cooperate. The County Council is under a legal duty to work with other bodies on strategic cross-boundary issues, including waste. So we will be liaising particularly with all the neighbouring waste planning authorities to make sure that we actually meet the requirements for duty to cooperate, and we can document that. The final point also comes from government policy, and this is the need to promote the proximity principle. So whilst we may have adequate facilities in the county, if new facilities come forward which enable waste to be treated closer to the point where that waste originates, then that would accord with government policy to help reduce movements. So again, there may well be good cases for granting planning permission to help promote the proximity principle. And if we could move to the next slide, please. So to be able to facilitate that, we need a waste policy framework. And at the moment, we very much have a criteria-based approach to waste, which focuses the larger waste facilities on the main urban areas in line with the proximity principle. We're still really proposing to continue with that approach, but we would like to try and simplify it. The policies at the moment are quite complicated, so we're looking at ways we can sort of make them more straightforward. The other thing, we are looking at perhaps moving away from the allocation of waste areas. The site locations document, which was the second part of the local plan, does identify areas potentially for waste management, but they are not waste sites. Unlike, for example, I've mentioned that we've allocated waste sites for sand and gravel extraction. They are specific sites where we expect applications to come forward to extract sand and gravel. Waste areas are not that. They're basically just industrial or employment areas which are identified in the district council local plans, where most of them will be developed for other industrial or employment uses, but we're just saying that those areas would be suitable for some of the plots to be used for certain waste facilities. But basically, these areas are identified in the criteria-based policy anyway, so including them as waste areas really hasn't been a major benefit in the local plan. So if I could move to the next slide, please. So really, so far I've focused really on the fact that updating the plan, we will need to make extra provision, particularly for aggregate minerals and potentially for waste. as I've already pointed out, though, the Lincolnshire, the actual review document itself did identify some problems with the policies in the Minerals and Waste Local Plan. Most of them are fairly minor, so I'm not going to run through them all today, but I've just sort of picked out 3 particular areas to give, first of all, an example of the sort of issues we're facing, and to highlight some of the more extreme ones. The first one relates to associated industrial development. So at the moment, we do have a policy in the Minerals and Waste Local Plan, which is a way of assessing applications for associated industrial development in connection with existing mineral workings. So it would apply to things like concrete block factories, where there might be a desire to put one of these facilities near a sand and gravel operation on the basis that you could utilise the sand and gravel from the quarry within that process. So the policy as it's worded at the moment does look, whilst it gives a presumption in favour of such development, it does look for close links with the quarry where the facility would be located. I think what the review document has shown is that the County Council has been prepared to grant perhaps certain development which probably could be described as not really having close links. It has links, but it doesn't have close links. So these are the type of things that we need to consider in the updating of the plan. Do we need to modify that policy? Instead of having close links, do we remove the word close? So fairly small scale changes, but they do have different impacts on the way we determine applications. The second one on that list is safeguarding mineral resources. Now, safeguarding mineral resources is a fairly new concept. I mean, it was brought in for the existing Minerals and Waste Local Plan when it was prepared. This was a new idea. It came from the National Planning Policy Framework. And the idea is that we should safeguard mineral resources in the ground, not just for now, but for future generations. So what it aims to do is really to prevent non-minerals development, such as housing development, etc., being built on top of important mineral resources. And where it is necessary to build that type of development, to look at whether the mineral resource could be worked out first. So on paper, it sounds like a really good idea, but actually in practice, it's quite difficult to implement. And I think most mineral planning authorities throughout the country have had a problem with it. Certainly the minerals industry is quite keen to protect all mineral resources, but we think there's a bit more need for proportionality on this particular policy. As it's currently drafted, non-minerals development, if it's going to be located in a mineral safeguarding area, then the developer is expected to produce a mineral resource assessment, which is quite an expensive process because it might involve putting down boreholes, etc. Now, in some cases, there is really very little chance that mineral working would be acceptable in these locations. So at the moment, we feel it's putting a bit of a burden on some developers. We think it's causing problems for the district councils because it can delay decision making, and it's causing problems for county council officers because, quite frankly, we're being inundated with consultations on this. So we are going to look at this in close liaison with the district councils to see whether we can make the policies more proportionate. The last one relates to landfill. At the moment, we do have a policy on landfill. It's a very restrictive policy because landfill sits at the bottom of the waste management hierarchy. The waste needs assessment has indicated that we do have sufficient landfill in the county, so we don't need to make any specific provision. And we certainly have a more than sufficient provision for non-inert waste. However, for inert waste, whilst we do have sufficient capacity, we only just have sufficient capacity. And what we have found, again, in terms of monitoring application performance, is that the County Council has been prepared to grant some mineral operators planning permission to import limited amounts of waste to aid in the restoration of quarries. So we are proposing to relook at this. So there may be some instances where importing inert waste into quarries might be beneficial to restoration proposals, particularly if they can increase things like biodiversity. But we want to be extremely cautious about it. I'm aware that there are some authorities in the country, particularly in the southeast, who very much promote the idea of infilling quarries, putting them back to original ground level. However, in the past in Lincolnshire, there are only limited amounts of inert waste generated, and if we're not careful with this, what we can end up with is quarries which basically never get restored, or or at least there are significant delays to the restoration of quarries. So whilst we are proposing to look at this policy again, we are proposing to do it fairly cautiously. If we can move on to the next slide, please. The whole process of updating the plan will be subject to what is known as a sustainability appraisal, which incorporates what's known as a strategic environmental assessment. And the preparation or the work on the sustainability appraisal is being carried out by an independent consultant to give it perhaps a bit more objectivity. The role of the SA is really to promote sustainable development, and that's really so it will look at the extent to which the emerging plan will help to achieve relevant environmental, economic and social objectives. And part of that process will involve looking at reasonable alternatives to see whether the options which we are proposing in the final plan basically look good compared to the options that have been thrown out. The first part of the sustainability appraisal is a scoping report, and the scoping report basically sets out the process. Well, it's the process setting out the context, the objectives and the approach that the sustainability appraisal will take. And that document, when it's completed, will be published alongside the issues and options document and the call for sites exercise, so that the public can make comments and other stakeholders can make comments on that document as well. So next slide, please. So in terms of consultation, we will be setting this to last at least 6 weeks, and that will commence in June. So the reason it won't commence immediately after the executive is because we just need to set up the website and make preparations. It will include the issues and options document, the proposed site selection methodology, and the scoping report when it's completed. And that consultation will be carried out with what's known as the Statement of Community Involvement, which was adopted by the County Council in 2019. Next slide, please. So the Statement of Community Involvement really sets out how the County Council will engage and consult the County Council, will consult the public and other stakeholders, and it will involve the consultation documents and associated information to be made available on the County Council's website. We will then notify by letter or email all the general and specific consultation bodies and the minerals and waste industry. Now, those consultation bodies will include, for example, the parish council. They'll include all the local organisations like the Wildlife Trust. They'll include all the statutory bodies like Historic England, etc. So it'll be a very widespread sort of consultation. We'll also make use of the County Council's social media accounts to publicise the consultation and issue informal press releases as well to give it more publicity. And then the final slide is basically if any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Before I move on to members, The actions for this report are: 1, determine whether we support recommendations to the Executive, and 2, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive prior to this decision. I've got a first question, Adrian, and it's a very interesting document that you've produced here, and I do welcome it, but I have some concerns. Straight away, my eyes were touched to your first paragraph, expressed views. And you know, recently I was involved with a local mineral waste extraction application. The main thing that the members of the public and the parish council said was there was the engagement with them was just a waste of time. Okay. As though we as an authority didn't listen to their views. And that I'm pleased you've got it in there, but I want more strength to their views to be taken notice of when they put concerns in. Not just to say, yes, they've given their views and just brush it aside and forget it and move on. But and also on this page here, 119, you talked about historic environment. I mean, on the positive side, for example, in Ancaster, they've got a park which was a former mineral quarry. So there was some good to come out of it, but on the negative side, it causes loads of problems with dust, vibration, yep, and lorry movement as well.
Okay.
So if I could ask you to take that on board.
Certainly, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I would point out as well that one of the things we've done in the issues and options document, as we've gone through all the topic areas, the issues areas, we have tried to highlight in each section the highlights from what national planning policy says on these issues as well, because it's important that the final plan accords with national policy. If we start straying beyond national policy, then the chances are the inspector will not find the plan sound and legally compliant. So we at least want to point out to the public and to other stakeholders that there are limits to what we can do, because we have to stay within the remit or in conformity with national policy.
Good, thank you very much, Dean. I now go to members' questions. Councillor Fleetwood.
Yes, I'd like to thank the officer for a full and comprehensive introduction to the report and going through it in great detail to explain fully where we're coming from. As many people who are involved in the current planning committee are aware, when we deal with applications, the current minerals and waste local plan has been very useful and has been very supported by the committee with regard to policy and how it moves forwards. However, it's not perfect, and we've all agreed to that this morning. It's good to hear that there is a revision coming, and whilst we're saying that the current plan isn't perfect, it's a long way from being imperfect. It's a very, very useful tool to the planning system. So I'd welcome a review. Indeed, every policy within any council should get a review. We've heard there is going to be potentially a shortage in a few years' time of stocks that might be extracted from the ground. So we do need to look at that. And I also welcome the concept of a full and open, transparent analysis of where all of the information will come from, whether it's new pieces of land or indeed when we do get down to policy, actually dealing with the policy later on, as we currently do, we do take into account local opinion from individuals and also parish councils and other bodies. So it's what weight you can actually afford to each of those items when you're actually dealing with an application. So from that point of view, yes, I completely support reviewing the policy. It will give us another benchmark, a higher benchmark to work to drive to. From that point of view, I'm quite happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Steve. Councillor Fleetwood. Any further questions? Councillor Marion Overton, MBE.
Thank you very much. There's certainly a lot of work and a very full introduction I appreciate and support, so thank you for that. I'd just like to, you did ask some questions, one of which was about the refilling of landfill sites using, of holes rather, of quarries, using material that's brought in to the county. And I think that is an issue for us because, and you did raise it as an issue, I think one of the biggest problems I get from my villagers is large lorries lumbering through narrow lanes through the villages, and if we allow these holes to be used, you know, I don't think we need to have them refilled. I think your point about having them restored as soon as possible is actually the priority. So I strongly support that point. The other one that I don't know if it's in here or not, I can't quite make it out, is the issue of where we have a new quarry being created affecting the water table of the neighbouring wildlife areas. Neighbouring areas, and Norton Disney is obviously an example where we've had that. You know, is that covered here sufficiently? And I think the third point was about whether you should be allowed to have a cement factory next to a quarry. And again, I think the quarries are not always in places where you would want a cement factory, for example. So I think those large industries would, you know, I think there shouldn't be a presumption to have a very large industry in an area. It has to be looked at on its own merits. So just some things into the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Adrian?
Yeah, I think yes, I appreciate your comments on inert waste, so they're noted. The second point is the water table and in sort of industrial development are sort of related in some respects, because these are matters which are largely covered by the development management policies of the plan rather than the core policies. So the development management policies look at the impacts on the environment and amenity, and basically, regardless, part of the core policies will link to the development management policies. So if the water table was going to be a problem for a wildlife site, or a concrete products factory was unlikely to be acceptable in its location because of the environmental impacts, then it wouldn't accord with the core policy either. Okay.
Thank you. And I think just one point, I'm very pleased to see that we're not very short of need, I think, on the whole, and that was quite helpful. There's still, and I also appreciated that you brought up the issue that there might be something about the proximity principle to put a new waste site possibly near where it was, where the waste was produced from. But we do produce waste in rural areas as well. So still would like Leadenham to have a recycling site. Thank you.
Sorry, if I could just add, we do have a policy for small scale waste operations outside the main urban areas. So there is some flexibility for that type of facility.
Thank you, Adrian. Any further questions from members? No. It's been moved by Councillor Fleetwood, and he moved that the committee endorses the report and supports recommendations as these are set out on page 90 of the report, and asks that our comments from today's discussions are passed on to the executive. So it's been moved by Councillor Fleetwood. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Taylor, seconded. All those in favour, please raise their hands. No, that's carried. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the work programme, the Environment and Economy Scrutiny work programme. Kira, are you able to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So the work programme, as is set out in your agenda packs, is giving you a quick overview of items to be taken in future meetings, as to offer you the opportunity to assess these and request for any further items to be considered for future inclusion in the work programme, as this is being currently developed for the next council term. So I'm happy to take any suggestions or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Have members any questions or comments on the work programme? Are we all agreed that that's work programme? Councillor Fleetwood.
I just note that there's a study visit to Gibraltar Point. Can we do it when the weather's possibly warmer and not wet? You know, we don't want to be going midwinter if we can avoid it.
That was moved Councillor Fleetwood due to COVID, so we haven't got a date yet set for that, but when we do, we'll let all members know. Apart from that, are we all happy, agreed that with the work plan? Good, thank you very much indeed. If that's the case, then I shall now, at 4 minutes past 11, it must be a record, close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you next meeting. Thank you.